It's been more than 2 years since COVID-19 was first discovered, and infection rates are still rising to record levels in virtually every corner of the globe. And that's expected to further widen the gap between rich nations, which have an abundance of vaccines, and poor countries that are struggling to roll out even their first dose. Paolo Montesilio has more.
Brazilian healthcare workers are once again struggling to keep up. The country's registered its highest number of daily COVID-19 cases since the start of the pandemic, with more than 137,000. That sent a steady stream of mostly unvaccinated patients into hospitals, which are already dealing with staff shortages because doctors and nurses have also fallen sick.
This is a big problem because the number of infected people is very high, and in some places there is already a lack of health professionals to provide adequate medical care to these patients.
Similar scenes are playing out around the world due to the Omicron variant. In the US, healthcare professionals are growing increasingly frustrated. That's because most of those who need treatment opted not to get vaccines.
84% of the hospitalized patients are unvaccinated. I need people to follow this science, get vaccinated, get boosted, get your kids vaccinated, get your kids boosted, because the health system long-term cannot sustain a high unvaccinated population.
Major economies with easy access to jabs have been struggling. But it's even more dire in emerging markets, where people can't get inoculations even if they wanted to. According to the World Health Organization, in the 36 poorest countries, only 1 in 10 people has gotten vaccinated. That leaves those nations vulnerable to the sustained economic shock from the pandemic. It also raises the risk of global efforts against the coronavirus going to waste.
The last 2 years have demonstrated a simple but brutal truth. If we leave anyone behind, in the end, we leave everyone behind. If we fail to vaccinate every person, we give rise to new variants that spread across borders and bring daily life and economies to a grinding halt.
The World Bank says global economic growth is expected to slow to 4.1% this year from the 5.5% expansion in 2021. And the lenders warning the slump could get worse if vaccines aren't rolled out fast enough to everyone. Paolo Montesilio, TRT World.
Well, one of the main reasons poor countries have lagged in vaccinations is their governments can't afford to buy them. To help cover the cost, the anti-poverty organisation Oxfam International is calling for a one-off tax on the world's richest people. The money raised would also be used to help bridge the wealth gap that's been made worse by the pandemic. Well, joining us to talk about that proposal is Max Lawson. He's the head of Inequality Policy at Oxfam, and he joins us now from London. Good to have you back with us, Max. As I mentioned, you're calling for this so-called one-off windfall tax on 10 of the world's richest people, a tax on the earnings that they made during this pandemic. Tell us more about this proposal and why you think it's appropriate.
Well, I think the first thing to say is the scale of the increase in billionaire wealth during COVID-19 is completely unprecedented. So you've seen this, the graph is almost like a graph of Omicron. You know, you see this exponential growth in their wealth, and that's largely because money from government has poured into the economy to support the economy, particularly in rich nations during COVID-19. Much of that has driven up the stock market, driven up the price of assets, and with that has driven up the fortunes of billionaires. So it's not as if these billionaires have worked twice as hard in the last 2 years. It's purely a result of government intervention. So what we're saying is, let's claw that money back. Let's use the tax system to take that money out of the bank accounts of billionaires and put it to work. And one of the things we could do, as you say, is fund the purchase of vaccines for the entire world. We could fund the development of a new wave of publicly owned vaccines that can beat Omicron and any new variants. There's all sorts of amazing things we could do with that money, but at the moment, it's in the bank accounts of Jeff Bezos, of Bill Gates. These guys are richer than they couldn't spend that money in 1,000 lifetimes. So let's put it to use. Let's tax the richest people on earth.
When we look at the state of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, we are in a situation where we're seeing some countries roll out their third and even fourth doses of the shots, while many millions, if not billions, of people around the world still haven't received a single COVID-19 shot. Who's to blame for this?
I think that there are two villains in the vaccine story. The first one is rich nations, and the second one is Western pharmaceutical corporations, particularly Pfizer. And what's happened is you had this incredible science, incredible discoveries of amazing vaccines, which is almost the best of humanity, if you like, how quickly we got to successful vaccines. And then instead of sharing those vaccine recipes with the whole world and allowing every qualified producer in Africa and Asia and Latin America to produce these miraculous vaccines, instead they were locked up behind a wall of monopoly and profit, and they're only produced by a few Western companies and sold at very high prices for astronomical profits. We calculate that Pfizer itself is making $1,000 profit a second from its COVID-19 vaccine. So I think what we need to see is we need more money to buy vaccines, but we also need to break through these barriers of intellectual property, these monopolies that are preventing the developing world from accessing vaccines and are killing people, costing millions of lives.
When we look at the problem of this growing wealth gap, we're seeing the world's two largest economies, the US and China, finally starting to look at proposals to help tackle the problem, including raising tax rates on the rich and, I guess, disbanding corporate monopolies. Are we moving in the right direction here?
I think it's hard looking at the world today to feel that anything is moving in the right direction. But I do think that the debate and the public understanding of the need to tax rich people more fairly, to get beyond the crazy situation where billionaires like Jeff Bezos are paying an effective tax rate of 3 or 4%. You know, they're paying lower taxes than you or I. Let's get to a position where they're paying their fair share of tax. I think politicians are beginning to listen to that. I think Joe Biden genuinely wants to increase taxes on the richest. I think the Chinese leadership do as well. And I think there's a sense in both these enormous economies that inequality is getting dangerously high, and that's undermining people's faith in government, people's faith in progress, and something has to be done. Do I think it will happen automatically? Absolutely not. We have to campaign for it, we have to fight for it, and many, many people, not least the billionaires themselves, will do everything they can to stop tax increases. But I remain hopeful. I'm a campaigner as well as a researcher, so we have to keep pushing fairer taxes.
Okay, Max Lawson from Oxfam. Always good to get your insights. Thank you for that.